Hello and welcome to another episode of Off My Shelves, and this time we are going to be looking at Grant Morrison's new X-Men Omnibus by Marvel, and yeah, let's get underway. I'm going to start off by telling you that I've read many X-Men Omnibuses and I've been left kind of empty by a lot of them. Sacrilegious, I know, but a lot of them are so dense in not that great story. I mean, take the Uncanny Omnibuses really. I read pretty much Volume 1 and Volume 2 and some of Volume 3 and I couldn't really get into it. It was very long-winded and there was a lot of bump. It was like watching a really good TV show, but the TV show being about 6 episodes too long and you just had to cut that bump out and then streamline it. This, on the other hand, has very little in the way of bump. It has tiny bits of bump, and for me it was my favourite X-Men run that I've read. And it doesn't surprise me because I really admire and love the work of Grant Morrison. The new X-Men Omnibus contains pretty much the entirety of Grant Morrison's new X-Men run. This is the third edition, the third printing of this, and I'm glad I got this because I'm a sucker for painted artwork on covers really. And beneath the dust jacket there's lovely painted boards and sides and back, wonderful in every way, and I really like that, to be honest. I am a massive sucker for painted covers on hardbacks. This omnibus starts off just all guns blazing. Really, it streamlines the amount of X-Men it is, and that's part of the reason I like it. Is you don't need, at least from the opening story arcs, you don't need a massive amount of backstory or information on these X-Men because there's not as many of them. There literally is a kind of much smaller team, whereas other X-Men books you might delve into, you met with a cast of like 8 or 9 or 10 people instantly, and you might be familiar with some of them not so well. The other thing I really admire is I grew up massively on the films, the cartoons, and then other random X-Men franchises and things like that. And so I was familiar with a lot of the main story threads really, you know, the Phoenix sagas and the Sentinels and stuff like that. And there were elements of that in here, but the enemies and the bad guys, if you want, and the main antagonists of the story were very different than I was normally used to. They were quite conceptual, high conceptual bad guys really, but I wouldn't expect anything less from Grant Morrison. Grant Morrison is very much a conceptual writer, and what I mean by that is he doesn't do things half-arsed or easily. He'll think of a really bold and strong idea and then explore it and see where it goes. I mean, anyone who read the Batman Grant Morrison run and any of Grant Morrison's work knows exactly what I mean by that, I think. And this starts off equally high conceptual, I think. Starts off pretty much with a battle scene between Wolverine and Cyclops, and then delves into a virtual world behind it with this unknown enemy who we later find out is named Cassandra Nova, and she is a main part of the story, a main thread of the story, and I really genuinely don't want to give you too much information about her. This opening story and what you learn about Cassandra and what you learn about everything in that opening story arc takes you right the way through to the very end of the omnibus. And the second story arc they introduce as well is equally the same. So the first story arc they introduce with Cassandra Nova, and then the second one where they introduce the xmen, are basically the main two threads through the entire book. Everything comes back to those two things. No matter where you go, no matter what you do in this book, it all comes back to that thread, and I think that was really well done, to be honest. That's part of the reason why I liked it so much, because wherever the story went, whether it went into space, whether it was destroying islands and killing millions of people, whether it was taking over sheer spacecraft, everywhere it went, it was all coming back to that main thread. But that doesn't really hit home until you get to the end. That's why I felt quite a good sense of relief and accomplishment when I got to the end, because it was like, oh, that all worked this way around. But then it still left it open for it to be continuing. The storyline at the start, the Cassandra Nova storyline, keeps coming back and forth, even though it does go away slightly and introduces the concept of the xmen. The xmen are amazing in this really, because they are harvesting mutant body parts and then putting it on themselves, so taking special mutated eyes off one mutant and then implanting them on themselves, and this becomes a whole religious movement in this book. And the depths of the xmen's involvement in this story don't become clear until you get to the very end, really, and that's another thing that I absolutely love as well. You're introduced to new characters as well, like the bad guys and like Nova and like the xmen, but also you're introduced to a new beast. Beast is looking totally different. He's had a second evolution, and they're introduced and they go to town on the notion of second evolution. Wolverine obviously is in it, and obviously is an intriguing character, as he always is. It introduces many new characters as well, and many new students to the school, like Beak and Angel, and it brings in Phantom X as well, and introduces the whole concept of the world, which is a place that they can suspend time and elongate it and shorten it to create and speed up construction of weapons, namely the Weapon X program that Wolverine was part of and all that type of thing. But where the story goes to it in between, even though I said, like I say, it keeps coming back to those two main threads that are started off at the top, you get everything from kind of high school dramas, from love interest, relationships and affairs, just telepathically between people. Even Bishop pops back up to do an issue where he is essentially a detective trying to solve a whodunit, is a murder at the Xavier School. And yeah, it's fantastic. It's really well worth anyone's time. If you're a fan of superhero books, if you're a fan of the X-Men, then I would say this is essential. If you're a fan of the X-Men, then you've already read it. But if you haven't read the X-Men before and you want to delve into X-Men history, then I do think this is a fine starting place, really. Certainly for me, even though I was familiar with the characters, I think going into it, you really don't need too much familiarity with it. It does take them, it changes their outfits, it changes how they look, it changes little bits and little quirks of their personality, and it's very much Grant Morrison's interpretation of those characters, really, and he's tried to modernise it as much as possible. Part of the extras at the back are actually a manifesto that he outlined and sent to Marvel, and it's page after page of what he would do and how he would rewrite and redo all this kind of X-Men past, because getting through X-Men continuity is a nightmare sometimes. But I certainly think if you knew certain X-Men continuity, then this might make it more interesting and better in places, but if you didn't, it doesn't, because the main threads of the story are brand new to this. Maybe certain elements of Jean Grey's past would help you kind of interpret parts of the stories, but apart from that, I doubt that you will get massive amounts more if you did a lot of back reading on this. The art in it is a rotating cast of artists. Frank Whiteley does a lot of it, but not all of it, so certainly if you're a fan of his art and you were getting it just for that, then be obviously aware that it's not all his artwork. Hopefully you've enjoyed having a look at new X-Men, and certainly if you haven't already got it, it is well worth picking up if you can find it, because it is a bit irritating to find. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.